soak the rich president who is sick of seeing the rich destroy the hardest working Americans. Like, he can't stand it for the sake of the American working class. And to punish him, Wall Street is literally just shorting him. They're shorting his agenda. They are betting against America. They are betting against the president because they cannot stand the idea that there is a person with power in America who is not on his knees in front of Wall Street asking them, and what would you like next? Donald Trump showed up and said he saw the game and he was like, no more. I'm on the side of the little guy. I don't care that the entire international global order is going to break down and scream at me and threaten recession and whatever. I am standing for the destroyed, forgotten, abused American working class against these global elites, and they can shove it.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope all's good wherever you are. I have a great conversation to share with you here between Michael Shellenberger, whom I support. I pay for his Substack, him, Matt Taibbi's, a few other actual journalists that I like to donate money to. I think they put out good work. And on his podcast, he had BATYA Ungar-Sargon, who also in her own right is very smart and qualified, former lefty, now a quote unquote, she calls herself a MAGA lefty. Don't really know what that would be, but either way, smart lady. I like her. I can like people I disagree with. Just a lot of people on the left these days are just completely gone bonkers. They're not reasonable. Anyways, this was a great conversation where they talk about Trump's tariff, and I think she nails it. I really do think she nails it. Let's get it.
BATYA Ungar-Sargon, welcome to Public.
Thank you so much for having me. As you know, I'm a huge, huge fan of yours, both when we agree and maybe even more so when we disagree, because it really forces me to question my priors. So thank you for being my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Everything that you do.
Well, the feeling is 100% mutual, and I'm really delighted to talk to you about the biggest issue of the day. Let's get into it. I mean, well, we got the stock markets crashing. As a MAGA lefty, you must be delighted at seeing this gigantic loss of wealth from the bourgeoisie. Tell me your reactions to what's going on. I'm sure you're confronting a lot of what I'm confronting, which is a lot of anger. People are mad at me for even trying to understand and explain the tariffs and the reaction. What's your take on what's going on?
Well, the first thing I want to talk to you about, because I haven't seen anybody address this, is the Democrats' theory of mind of Donald Trump has been destroyed, right? I mean, right? They spent the whole last decade saying this man exists to put money in the pockets of wealthy elites like himself. And now that he is intentionally tanking the market in order to redistribute wealth to the American working class, which is what we've always said has been his sort of primary intention, they don't have a theory of mind for why he's doing this. I haven't heard anybody explain. They're just like, how dare he do this? You have a lot of how dare he from Wall Street, a lot of, this is insane from the Democrats, but I have not heard a single explanation from them as to why they think he is doing this. And I think that deep down, they realize why he is doing this. And it is to reverse 6 decades of economic and trade and immigration policy that immiserated the American working class. And it's very interesting. That part of it specifically is very interesting to me, because their whole theory about why he sucks has fallen apart before everybody very, very spectacularly. What do you think about this?
Now, we know that most of these are going to be negotiation tactics. With a lot of these countries, I would guess that in the first 60 days, a lot of these tariffs are off the board, canceled off for both parties. That's my thought. Now, I got a lot more thoughts on this, but I'm going to get back to the video. But before I do, if you don't mind just smashing that thumbs up button for your boy, consider subscribing to the channel, help it grow if it's not your first time here. Let's get back to Michael Shellenberger.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is exactly how I wanted to start. I mean, I went online and, Ezra Klein interviewed Paul Krugman. I have my differences of opinion with Paul Krugman, who doesn't, with Ezra Klein, sure. But I mean, these are two, smart guys. I mean, arguably the most important economist on the Democrat, progressive side of things, maybe the most important influential journalist on the progressive liberal Democrat side of things. It was shocking to me. Like, literally, like, they could, at no point in this conversation, it must have gone for over an hour, maybe an hour and a half, At no point did they actually explain what Trump was doing. I mean, it was almost a caricature of the caricature, because there's a online meme that you and I are both familiar with, which is sort of orange man bad,
Right.
which is something that people on the right will say about people on the left who sort of treat Trump as a demonic figure, which, like every characterization of your opponents as evil, it just ends thinking. It's a way of not thinking about your opponent. So it's actually anti-empathy. And, if you're actually in politics or in a war, that's deadly. You absolutely need to understand your opponent. So I mean, I was kind of floored with it. So they never actually were able to debunk anything because they never properly represented what he was doing. He Krugman eventually landed on this idea that Trump had a kind of irrational fetish loving tariffs, and that he then goes and just surrounds himself with yes men. I mean, I think like a lot of people have been seeing Scott Bessent do television. I thought he had an incredibly clear explanation with Tucker Carlson. There's another gentleman, he's less famous. His name is he's the head of the Council of Economic Advisors, Moran, Stephen Moran, and he wrote this paper. I went through this paper by you, and I counted how many times he said negotiation or negotiating. 14 times. You go to the Tucker Carlson interview with Scott Bessent, the first thing he says is that Trump is adding a third, this is the transcript, Trump is adding a third leg to the stool, and he's using tariffs to negotiate. All of this noise about the people who obsessed with the formula. Oh, the formula, it's not, there's some duplicating numbers. It's really just dividing deficit by imports, and that's all it is. And there's really, Trump is just, they're just doing, they can't quite finish the sentence, which everybody knows is that they're negotiating. So, I mean, it's so simple, but they can't acknowledge that he's negotiating for some reason. And maybe your explanation is the right one, which is that if they have to acknowledge he's negotiating, then you say, on whose behalf is he negotiating? And it's actually on the side of the American worker who's been left behind.
I mean, it's so simple. And there is no, other alternative explanation except that this is a soak the rich president who is sick of seeing the rich destroy the hardest working Americans. Like, he can't stand it. There are other things the tariffs are doing. So the only explanation you do hear from them is, well, the different explanations he has for them conflict with each other. On the one hand, there's the national security rationale, then there's the negotiation, then there's the reshoring. Aha! But how can he reshore manufacturing if he's willing to negotiate? I mean, this is the level we've stooped to because they simply will not accept that there is only one explanation for why he is doing this. And it is that they used to do this because they used to represent labor and they abandoned labor. And so now their enemy is doing it, right? I mean, that is the whole story right here. Liberation Day should go down in history as the day that finally put to bed the myth that Donald Trump only cares about the rich. It's the exact opposite. He is waging class warfare on Wall Street for the sake of the American working class. And to punish him, Wall Street is literally just shorting him. They're shorting his agenda. They are betting against America. They are betting against the president because they cannot stand the idea that there is a person with power in America who is not on his knees in front of Wall Street asking them, and what would you like next? The way both parties have been doing for 60 years. And
Right.
there's just no other way to see this. And I really wish someone would make an explanation that was not this so that I could legitimately have a because it's infuriating. I mean, it's utterly infuriating. Our economic policy for the last 60 years was put in place by people who are too lazy to get out from behind their laptops. And so they imagine that nobody would want to work in a factory because they would rather die than work in a factory. They would rather die than watch their own children, by the way, or clean their own toilets. So they imagine that no one would want to do these things. And so they shipped manufacturing overseas and imported a slave caste to do all of the service industry jobs. And then they just go out there and insult the millions of Americans who are employed in these actual industries, the millions of Americans who remember their grandparents having a decent living wage and the American dream while working at a meatpacking plant, because that was the job to have back in the day. So it's so disgusting. And then they sit there on Twitter and say, does anybody really want to work in manufacturing? From their from their $2 million homes that they were able to purchase, Michael, because they, through their policy, shoved the working class out of competition for homes, for an education, and for healthcare, right? So the top 10% now controls over 60% of our GDP. They are not just like the ideal consumer now for the most important things, the most central components of the American dream: housing, healthcare, education, retirement. They are the only consumers now who can afford those things. So the price for those items is tagged to their incomes. Doctors used to marry nurses and lawyers used to marry secretaries. And now doctors marry doctors and lawyers marry lawyers, and they buy up real estate, and real estate is now pegged to their, joint $2 million income, which means that their cleaning lady has to commute 2 hours to get to them because she could never dream of even renting in their neighborhood. And then they have the chutzpah to say, well, who would ever want to do the job of being a cleaning lady? The majority of cleaning ladies in America are American citizens. How dare you sneer at people who work 10 times harder than you and have to work 2 jobs because of the economy you made in the name of this, higher value of globalization. So that's the whole game right there. Donald Trump showed up and said he saw the game and he was like, no more. I'm on the side of the little guy. I don't care that the entire international global order is going to break down and scream at me and threaten recession and whatever. I am standing for the destroyed, forgotten, abused American working class against these global elites, and they can shove it. Wall Street, you do what you need to do. I don't work for you. It's the most glorious thing I've ever seen. If you had told me a month ago that there was a person in this world, on this planet Earth, who had the guts to do that, I would not have believed you.
Yeah, things have been moving really quickly, accelerating at a crazy, crazy pace. But if you're somebody who voted for Trump, you obviously voted for this because President Trump's been railing about this, and he's been railing against bad trade deals for the last 30 or 40 years. President Trump is a businessman. He identified trade deficits. And the way trade is supposed to be constituted is that we do what we do best, and you do what you do best, and we'll be trade partners. And by doing so, you will make us wealthier, and we will both be able to have a flourishing future. What ended up happening in the 90s, early 2000s, but in the 90s, there were 3 critical mistakes made by first Bill Clinton. The entrance of China into the World Trade Organization, the NAFTA, and also the repeal of the idea of investment banks and commercial banks. That's a whole separate issue for another time, but the conflation of investment and commercial banks allowed the cheap flow of money to go into the capital markets in a way that specific deregulations, I think, actually led us to the 2008 financial crisis. Now, free trade did make the stock markets go up. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's doubting that. Unlimited, unfeathered free trade did make the 10% do very, very well. Now I am part of this 10% of the country. And I know a lot of you guys are as well. And I can say this as somebody who is part of this evil 10% of the country. When you do work, we're talking about the socioeconomic ladder here. When you do work that does not involve your hands, that only involves your brain, that you do not involve your body in your work or your hands in your work, free trade traditionally is a great idea because we've become an information economy and a consumer economy and not an industrial one. We thought because we were entering into a technological revolution, because we were entering into a brave new world back then, that unfettered, unapologetic free trade was the way to go. We no longer need to make stuff. Of course, during COVID, we found out that not making stuff was a bad idea. We leave that to the third world, and they make all our stuff for us, and we become wealthy. Well, that didn't work out so good for a lot of people. Let's get back to it.
It's really incredible. I mean, at one point, at some point, let's get to this issue of kind of where we sit in history, because I mean, we're clearly at this massive pivot point. I always, I joke with my friends, like people would always be pushing this book on me, The Fourth Turning, and it always looked like some new age hippie. I was like, that's too woo. I was like, I'm like into empirical, trends or whatever. But The Fourth Turning, and the idea was every 80 years there's a cycle. 1776, 1864, the civil rights, the Civil War, 1945, 2025. I mean, you get these incredible cycles, and I mean, we're clearly in one. And I mean, I wrote, I was kind of like, look, I mean, it's not really true. I was saying, whatever you think of Trump, he's clearly a world historical figure. I know there are people that hate Trump so much they think it's just a blip, and they have the sort of the similar illusion they had under Biden, which was that Trump was just kind of a bad dream that we awoke from. We're not really reverting to nationalism. We're on track. It's still neoliberal. It's still global. I mean, I think though, I want to talk more about the reaction, because I think you're totally right. I mean, I will not name names, but I mean, there are a lot of people that I've known and respected and liked that are just, first of all, there's just a whole set of folks that are like, this is bad because the stock market has crashed. I mean, right there, you're just like, seriously. So we're going to just turn over our nation to the whims of stock traders. And Bessent, one of the things he said with Tucker, I think he pointed out that Warren Buffett says that in the short term, the stock market is a voting machine. In the long term, it's a weighing machine. So the idea that you're supposed to sort of put the entire future of the country, the lives of hundreds of millions of people in the hands of people that are trying to, day trading and trying to make a buck, it's offensive, and it's completely irrational. Like, even if you completely disagree with these tariffs, you would not want to set the policy based on those traders. I think it, like you said before, it completely exposes the left that was claiming to be a class-based left. I mean, if you were a Bernie Sanders supporter 10 years ago and you're not supporting these actions now, then you were just full of shit the entire time.
Totally.
And there's a whole bunch of Bernie bros that have now, I think, become MAGA that are more consistent. But otherwise, it was just all performative politics. I think the other thing, Bobby, like you were saying, I mean, I think there's some people, I would say, to give them the benefit of the doubt, is I don't really think they know how bad it is. I don't think they don't know how bad the situation is. I mean, first of all, just on the national security side, we still don't make chips. Like, I think people think you passed a CHIPS Act and now it's all, we don't make microchips. And then people say, well, but Taiwan's our ally. Are you aware of what could go down at any minute in Taiwan? I mean, China can take Taiwan. So just on a national security level, we remain completely unprepared. I can't remember his last name, but he's a famous VC, tweeted out over the weekend that if you don't make drones, like, you don't have a country. Like, if you have to depend entirely on China, you don't have a country.
Right.
But then you get to things like personal protective equipment, and we all know that maybe masks were pointless, but whatever, you need personal protective equipment. Like the medical industry, you need to be able to make a set of things at home. We're not making them. And then I thought, to your point, there was also this issue of the critics of this, they go, well, what are we going to do? Make T-shirts? Well, if you listen to people like Orrin Cass, who I interviewed last week, I know someone that you follow closely. He's a very interesting figure. 29 years old, was top domestic policy advisor to Mitt Romney. Of course, he hates Trump, but Orrin Cass has really come onto the side of a more nationalist economic program. He points out, look, we're probably not going to compete for making T-shirts. That's just that may not be what comes here. But the idea that we should just like kind of wishful thinking around the high tech stuff. Then the other thing that people say, they say, well, the manufacturing that comes here won't create many jobs. So it's kind of like, either they're saying that you shouldn't want to have manufacturing because it's going to create too many low wage jobs, or we shouldn't want manufacturing because it won't create enough jobs. It'll all be robots. But there's a broader argument for manufacturing, just as a security question. I mean, as I think Trump said at one point, if you don't make steel, you're not a real country. I mean, you have to be able to make. There's all the supply chains that come with manufacturing. So I mean, I think it's just I don't think people understand at a national security level just how bad of a way we're in.
Trump ran on these tariffs, right? Even worse than doing the tariffs would be not doing the tariffs. We can all agree that this is going to be a gamble. Now, I'm going to be honest with all of you. I'm for this, but it is an economic gamble. There is a risk associated with all of this. I trust JD, I trust Susie Waz and Stephen Miller, and especially Donald Trump, but there is a risk, obviously, with all these things that we do. And I'll tell you at the end of the video why I think this is a great risk, because I think this is a great risk that is going to help the American middle class, the labor force of America. Trump ran on tariffs, so if he doesn't implement the tariffs, this is even worse, because that means that you can just pander to a constituency endlessly and tell them you're going to do something, and then they vote for you and you don't do jack shit. That's even worse. If you voted for Trump, this is what you voted for. But look, this could go horribly wrong. Who knows, right? We don't know. I trust these people in power that we voted for. Europe and China are going to be the two main, I don't want to say country because Europe's not a country, but the two main partners that this could really escalate, good or bad. We could go through de-dollarization. I don't think we will, but it's a possibility. Let's get back to it.
You're not a real country. I mean, you have to be able to make. There's all the supply chains that come with manufacturing. So I mean, I think it's just I don't think people understand at a national security level just how bad of a way we're in. And then on the issues that I think you've done such a good job of raising the alarm about, these issues of inequality, or I might even say just the destruction of social solidarity, where you have an entire class of people. And I pointed this out last week when I defended these tariffs. There's like a whole, discipline of studying why civilizations, destroy themselves. The famous line from Toynbee is, civilizations don't die by murder, they die by suicide. It's when the elites identify not with their own countrymen, but with other elites. And even more terrifying, when they identify with the working class or the poor in other countries and stop identifying with the poor in their countries. So you see people where I live in Berkeley, maybe where you live in New York, people that live in the coastal areas. I mean, they're called the flyover. They call them the flyover, areas for a reason. I mean, these are places that are actively disrespected. You look at the level of disrespect for hillbillies, the Appalachians, like just the disrespect for, this book on my shelf, White Rule Rage, came out, which basically is a couple of intellectuals just projecting their hatred onto the working class, onto the MAGA voters. I interviewed a brilliant sociologist over the weekend, Leah Greenfeld, who wrote, in my view, the best book ever on nationalism. She's written a trilogy. The second book was on capitalism. The third book was on madness, and her argument that that nationalism and modernity actually create all this pressure on the self and the ego, and that's why you get a lot of psychiatric disorders. She points out that really nationalism is the process of giving dignity to the people, and that before nationalism, which she refers to as a form of consciousness, not as just a kind of pride, but there is that, but that before it gave dignity to ordinary people. Well, that dignity has been lost, and we've been moving into this the pre-nationalist world, which she looks at as 15th century England. It's really the 16th century that you get the rise of this view. Every human being in your country deserves dignity. Well, that's gone. And so, but the darker view that you pointed out is that maybe they actually have some awareness of their own animus to their fellow countrymen. And that's why they're so quick to sort of attack these policies, because it's actually, Trump is just at a psychological level, he's triggering he's making people aware of their own shadow, which is their own shadow is that they really don't like their fellow Americans, particularly don't like their own working class. They disrespect them, and they know that about themselves, and they know it's wrong at some level, and they see Trump standing up for the working class, and it triggers a kind of defensive reaction in them.
All great points. On the national security front, I'll just sharpen a little bit what you said. We literally rely on our greatest adversary for the tools that we would need to fight it, should it come to that, right? They exported a deadly pandemic, and we relied on them to produce the vaccines and the pharmaceuticals and the protective gear we needed to combat it. This is it's like a South Park episode, right? Only
Yeah.
without the humor. It's so absurd and so obviously absurd. And yet nobody had the guts to do anything about this. On the contempt that the elites have for the working class, it truly does. It is the engine behind all of the policies that have led to this, because those policies created an economy which was an upward funnel of wealth from the hardest working Americans into the pockets of the college educated. You know, the educated elites, they love to rail against the billionaires. But if you
Yeah.
look at the share of the GDP that's controlled by billionaires, it has not significantly changed since the 70s, when the largest share of the wealth in this country was held by the middle class. It's gotten a bit bigger, but not significantly. And yet the middle class has been totally destroyed. So where did all that wealth go? It went to the top 10%, the top 20%, the over-credentialed college elites, the very people who rail against,
Hmm.
and those people, like, just they have so much contempt for the working class. It was created by these successive democratic administrations, which shipped really good manufacturing jobs overseas to build up China and Mexico's middle class, and then imported millions and millions and millions of people to work in this country in construction and janitorial services and landscaping and healthcare and childcare and all sorts of jobs that used to provide Americans with, a very stable middle class life. And of course, the beneficiaries of that have been the consumers of all of that labor, the
Right.
educated elites who don't have time to watch their own children or to change the diapers of their grandparents when they get elderly or to do their own landscaping. They're very wealthy, but somehow they really want it to be much cheaper to enjoy a bottle of wine and go out to a restaurant. So having that open border, having all of this offshoring of manufacturing literally put trillions of dollars in their pockets. And as we were saying before, it shrunk the competition they faced for crucial goods and services like real estate. So we had this upward transfer of wealth from the working class into the asset rich. Which is these elites that we're talking about. And as a result, they developed this unbelievable contempt for the Americans who they had made poor, who used to be sort of on a par with them. They saw a college degree not as an economic arbitrary gatekeeper to the American dream, but rather as some sort of virtue signal, some sort of like proof that they were smarter and wiser and better people, when of course it was the exact opposite, because it can't get through academia today, can't get a college degree without being exposed to a lot of the woke ideology that actually makes people much worse people and makes them fundamentally incapable of feeling national pride or a sense of noblesse oblige or a sense of obligation to their neighbors, because in their minds, their good fortune is the result of their intelligence and their hard work because they studied so hard for these tests, blah, 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 blah. And of course, they're not religious. And so they have no sense of obligation or to God or gratitude. Like, they've become convinced that this inherently unfair system is actually a meritocracy. You have, on the other hand, Americans who have nothing left except their pride in this country, right? And then that was taken from them by these elites when they opened the border and they called you racist. If you said, wait a minute, how come my kids no longer have access to the American dream, but we're giving it to all of these people from failed socialist states, right? Suddenly then you were a racist. Suddenly nationalism was white nationalism. They wanted to take that last bit of pride that they had away from them. And I cannot agree with you more. If you have, it's not even like that, like, insane. If you have a college degree and you work in an industry that requires a command of the English language, a credential, or what have you, you do have more in common at that point with people, global elites. If you have a rich stock portfolio and you own a lot of real estate, you are invested in a portion of the economy that is really out of reach for most Americans. And if you look at how that decimation of the middle class, so in 1971, which was the high water mark for working class purchasing power, right? They make a little bit more today, but they cannot afford the hallmarks of the American dream. So that purchasing power, when the vast majority of not the vast majority, but the largest share of the wealth was in the middle class, 25% of our economy was in manufacturing. And that's not an accident. Manufacturing jobs give people a middle class life. These are really good jobs. They give them a real sense of pride in their community and their work, what have you. Today, only 11% of the economy is in manufacturing, but 20% of our economy, which is the largest share, is in finance and real estate, right? So you really just saw this upward transfer of wealth into the pockets of the asset rich. And Trump just showed up. He clocked it for what it was. He has this heart for the working class. I don't know why. He's a billionaire. He could have gone his whole life without having it, but he has it. And he said, no more. We're turning the spigot back in the opposite direction.
It's incredible. I mean, by the way, just to put a final point on the difference between manufacturing and service sector wages, I just looked it up. So this is Bureau of Labor Statistics. 107,000 a year is the average manufacturing salary. 37,000 is the average service sector salary. So, I mean, that's just a huge difference. The response from AEI, including people I really like and respect, they just go, there's so much more purchasing power. You can have a smartphone now, but it's just, it's ridiculous. You don't have the big assets, the homes, and then the dignity and the inequality. These things have not been resolved. I mean, it's so just on this, the elite reaction, I saw Fareed Zakaria, another, sort of spokesperson for the global elite. He gets up last night. I couldn't even finish, to be honest. He started. I was like, this is just. He basically was like, Trump has this idea that America has been victimized. Now there's and how absurd that is. Now there's some truth to some of this, which is that I did a rant. I was upset after the Zelensky White House meeting, where I just point out that, like, Europeans don't respect Americans. Like, they just don't. Like, I've spent a lot of time in Europe. I promise you that just they don't. But it's a weird sort of dynamic because they know they need us.
Right.
And of course we go there. And
if you're somebody in the trades, right? So if you're somebody like a welder, you should be loving this. And I think both parts of the country, both people in the country, I'm part of that 10%. But I also think the labor force needs to be looked after. And I think this is the first time in a long time that these people should be thinking that this is one of the greatest weeks in politics. Somebody is finally looking out for the blue collar workers. Somebody is finally telling those people on Wall Street, those bankers, F you. They have a fighter in the White House, a fighter they've been waiting for. Now, both constituencies should be just as valued. One is the capital class and the other is the labor class. But what you want is an equilibrium between the both. You don't want to have a party, or both parties in most cases, only looking out for the top 10%. Nobody's happy with what's going on with the stock market. But again, when you look at America, and you got 10% of Americans that own 88% of all the equities, 40% own 12% of the stock market, and the bottom 50% have debt. They have credit card bills. They rent their homes. They have auto loans. And they've been screaming for some relief for a decade. And now they have a president in the White House that is going to look after them. So if you're somebody in the labor class, you should be enjoying this, and don't let the Democrats scare you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought it was a great conversation with two very, very smart people. I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.